Hello and welcome to the third episode of the Ancient Coin Collection podcast with me, Annabel Schooling, and Dr. Tim Wright.
Hello.
Before we begin today, I just want to thank everyone for the encouraging response that we've received on the first two episodes. And we now have an Instagram under @Ancient Coin Collection Podcast. Thank you very much for the subscribers. And if anyone has any feedback, we'd love to hear from you. Feel free to put it in the comments below or DM us. I'm really excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking about provenance. Now, provenance is quite a buzzword in the numismatics world. And in parts 1 and 2, we're going to discuss the nobility and royalty that contribute to this reputation of early numismatics as the hobby of kings. And part 3, we're going to focus on the no less important women of this field. So what is provenance? Well, essentially, it is the collecting history of a coin. And you can look at it as a series of stories formed in the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries onwards. Often when you look at an auction catalogue, in the notes you will often see X Sotheby's 1990 hunt, and then you'll have auction number and then a lot. Or if you're lucky, you might see Posy or Lockett or different names. And these are the people who either had the immense wealth or the time and dedication to devote themselves to building a world famous collection. So much so that even their name can increase the price of a coin. So, Tim, why should we be bothered about provenance? Why is it important?
Well, as you say, people are obsessed with provenance nowadays. And the specific reason for that is that there's been international treaties and national legislation to protect cultural property. So whether that's art, antiquities, or coins are included in that. And a lot of that started in and around 1970 and was forward-looking. And so individual collectors, but also museums, they're very, very concerned not to buy objects, including coins, that don't have a provenance, a history, as you described it, that goes back before that date. So it's about authenticity. It's about whether the way in which something came to market broke the law. That's why people are obsessed with provenance. But as you say, the more interesting part of provenance are the stories about the collectors and owners of the coins, and the journeys that they have taken from their origins, in the case of the Naxos Tetradrachm, from Naxos in Sicily in the 5th century BC to the present day. Where was it found? Who found it? Who were the dealers who sold it? Who were the collectors who owned it? How did they own it? How do they have the money to be able to buy that? Why did they collect? What happened when they died? Did they bequeath it to a museum, etc.? And those stories and those travels are really the most exciting part of this story. And that's why, if you recall, we adopted the name for the book, Travels with the Naxos Masterpiece, because literally these coins travel and they travel through collectors, and those journeys and stories are the provenance.
Yeah, I thought that was a lovely title, to be honest.
Well,
nice way to summarize it.
Yes, good.
So when did the hobby of collecting begin?
So if you go on the internet and you say, who's the first coin collector, you'll see people say that it was Augustus, Emperor Augustus, the Roman. And, no doubt the Romans were obsessed with all things Greek. It said that Rome conquered Greece militarily, but Greece conquered Rome culturally.
Yes.
So they collect stuff. There was an art market. There were statues. You hear, for example, about Cicero. Cicero made his name bringing a prosecution against the governor of Sicily, who'd looted all of the Greek artifacts of Sicily. So certainly the Romans loved all things Greek. Were they collectors of Greek coins? So the reference that people quote is Suetonius, who was a writer in the late first, early 2nd century AD. And he refers to Emperor Augustus giving coins to guests during the Feast of Saturnalia. And so they say, well, he was the first numismatist. Actually, much more likely, he was just giving curiosities, old objects to guests, and he wasn't collecting and studying coins in the way that we think of as numismatics. For that, we really need to wait until the Renaissance. And it was in the Renaissance when there was this revival of interest in all things classical, Greek and Roman. And that's when the likes of Federico Petrarch, the poet, writer, translator, he collected coins. And there are stories about vine workers and agricultural workers finding coins in the fields and then taking them to him and him dusting them off and buying them for
money.
For money. And so, once everyone knew that Petrarch was collecting, obviously they suddenly discovered lots and lots of coins. And the ones that he was focused on were not Greek coins, but they were actually Imperial Roman coins. It coincided with Suetonius, the 12 Caesars. And what they loved to do was to find a coin with the image of one of those 12 Caesars, Roman emperors, and then use that image to explore and validate the personality of the emperor as described in Suetonius. And that was really the origins of numismatics in the Renaissance.
In the same vein, when was our Naxos Tetradrachm discovered?
So the honest answer is we don't know. So we see the Naxos Tetradrachm described in publications about Greek coins only in the second half of the 18th century.
So it's much later.
Much later. And why was that the case? There was probably some confusion. The coin was found. It had Naxion, or a reference to Naxos on it. I think in the early days, that was probably assumed to be the island of Naxos in the Aegean. But there are a few coins referred to in publications and known to be in collections in the late 18th century. So probably the first ones were unearthed around about that time or shortly before. But we simply don't know. The first documented hoards of coins were in the 19th century. And the biggest Naxos hoard was in the middle of the 19th century, discovered at Schizo Peninsula, which is the site of Naxos. But again, we can't trace individual coins back to that. We can trace a few back to a much later hoard. So there are about 12 documented coin hoards that include the coins of Naxos and may include coins, the particular coin that we're looking at, the Tetradrachm.
So tell me a little bit about hoards.
Well, numismatists and archaeologists get very, very excited about hoards. What is a hoard? A hoard is a discovery. I think there's a definition which is more than a certain number of coins. But it's when you discover coins together in a purse, in a pot. And the reason why numismatists get excited about it is you look at the coins in that collection that are found together. You can date it by taking the latest coin, but also you look at where it was found and you can tell the story about why it was buried, or you can speculate as to how it was buried. There's a fantastic book book written by Eleanor Gay at the British Museum about hoards, and she describes them as time capsules. So that it's a view into the world. Why were these coins buried together? Was there, was there a war? Was there an invasion? Was it just someone putting it, a legionary
putting it away for a rainy day?
Exactly. There weren't banks. You couldn't go in and deposit your cash with a bank in the way that you can today. So people would hide their wealth, particularly in times of crisis, and they may not come back.
You find them under floorboards of houses and things like that.
Absolutely. So you find them, they were hidden away, and why weren't they retrieved? Well, maybe there was a war and the person who hid them died. Maybe they had to flee. And so some of those, many years later, are rediscovered. And that's the main source of coins that we collect, including the Naxos Tetradrachm, because other coins would have been melted down and recycled to create new coins. But only the ones that were buried are the ones that then get rediscovered and survive. And those are the ones that we have in collections today.
I know that particularly the Greeks did do a lot of the recycling, like they did that with statues and things.
Yeah.
Repurpose the material.
And silver, you imagine you have a change of regime. Sometimes when what do you have on coins? You have rulers, authorities. When you have a change, you say, okay, I'm gonna bring in all of the coins from the previous circulation. I'm going to melt it down. I'm going to reissue new coins. Sometimes they overstrike old coins. So we're getting a little bit sidetracked, but that's what hoards are, and that's why people get excited about them.
So coin collecting is sometimes referred as the hobby of kings. Why is that?
Well, we anyone who's a collector likes to have their hobby referred to as the hobby of kings. But the origin is, we talked about the Renaissance time and Petrarch. The earliest collections of coins were probably in the Renaissance, and those that were in a position to collect, had the means to collect.
They had wealth.
And so those were kings and queens and Renaissance princes. And they used to have what in some ways are the first types of museums. They would create cabinets. And these would be called, cabinets of curiosities, or the German word was Wunderkammer or Wunderkammern. And these would be collections of lots of different things, not systematic in the way that a museum would have, but they would be, the tusk of some animal. They would have natural and man-made artifacts, a collection of things that are extraordinary and inaccessible to most people, and they would be displayed in fabulous cabinets or rooms and shown to the guests of the prince or the king, and those would reflect well on the king. This is a learned person with the means and knowledge to gather this collection. Look at me. I'm really clever. I'm really important. I'm really wealthy. Come and have a look at the goodies that I've got that no one else can have. And included in that would be coins. Over time, these cabinets became more specialized and more organized, and you still have the word cabinet to describe coin collections. So in France, the cabinet des médailles is the descendant of the royal collection. You have Münz cabinet in Germany, which are the collections of coins that descend from princely collections. So this is what they would have in their collections. This is the royal collections, and over time, many of them became national collections.
I have to say, it's lovely in my office because we have all these cabinets along with sort of various different bits of pot and it's for display. It's nice having things out, because that's what I think art should be.
Well,
but
a tragedy, the great, in a sense, the tragedy of coins is that you have these vast collections in museums, and they are away in the vaults, and only a tiny fraction are displayed. And that's because it's quite difficult to display coins. Coins are tiny, and maybe they're 20 millimeters wide, 2 centimeters wide. At the most, many are much, much smaller than that. How do you display those in cabinets in a way that people can examine them? So, people got quite innovative with magnifying glasses and stuff like that. But they're not really displayed very, very publicly.
I'm digressing here, but I have to say they had some amazing ways of like new types of curation in museums in Greece, actually, particularly in Thessaloniki.
Okay.
I went to go see the way that they displayed the coins, and they'd had them almost suspended in the cabinet.
Yeah.
Invisibly.
Yeah.
And that was a fantastic way of doing it. And they were given quite good prominence.
Yeah.
Which, is good. I think they should be.
Yeah.
But so were royalty the only ones who could afford to have the coin collections?
Initially, yes. And what used to happen, what was quite interesting, is Amschelmeyer Rothschild, the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, he went round, he built his business going around the royal courts and doing a number of things, lending money, which is what the bank is famous for, but also selling jewelry and also coins. And so, it's cross-sell. I'm going to, here's a loan, here's some jewelry, here are some coins. And that's why quite a lot of the early dealers in coins were also bankers. And that's why the Jewish community, particularly in Germany, were so prominent in the coin dealing business. And of course, tragically, they were persecuted by the Nazis, and a lot of the coin dealing businesses moved out of Germany and moved to Switzerland, places like that. But back to your question, they were the target market because they had the means to build the collection, and also they had the motivation to show that off. But then, of course, lesser aristocrats wanted to emulate the sort of kings and queens, and so
I suppose with the emergence of the middle class.
Well, we see the emergence, but even before that, you have the Grand Tour. And the Grand Tour was mainly Northern European noblemen. And mainly men. There were a few women who went on the Grand Tour, but there's mainly the eldest son of aristocratic families, and they would be sent to finish their education in Europe, and they would be sent with a Cicero, who is their guide. Hence Cicero used for guidebooks, and they would be taken around Italy, and they would go and visit all the sites, and they would acquire art and antiquities and artifacts. And of course, some of the more portable versions of those would be coins. And so they would bring back with them coins to form the part of collections, including Greek and Roman coins. So that was, if you like, the aristocracy, the nobility were aping the royal collectors in starting to become collectors. So it started to democratize a little bit, but it was still very much hobby of privileged aristocracy. And then some of the great collections became those of aristocrats.
So it was the vogue for all things classical in the 18th century.
Yeah.
So who were the most famous aristocratic collectors?
Yeah. Well, there are loads, but ones that owned one of the Naxos coins, we start with the Duc de Luynes. I think that's
French,
correct.
Obviously.
Correct pronunciation. Who was a very wealthy French aristocrat, impeccable pedigree, obviously, landed, and vast resources. And he collected Greek vases, but also coins. And he built possibly one of the most important collections of ancient coins in Europe, in the world. And it was interesting. I was doing some research and I came across this correspondence between him and the curator of the French National Collection. And he said, I'm going to leave my collection to the French state because those terrible English people are using all of their money, their gold, their ill-gotten gains to buy up all the good collections. And Britain, our arch competitor,
rivals,
perfidious Albion, is going to have a better collection. So I'm going to leave my collection to the French state in order to counter the threat that the British have a better collection. But he hadn't formalized all of the details of the bequest before he died. And so his wife, who survived him, had a bit of leverage with the French government. And she said, we will give the vase collection and the coin collection, but in return, we want to have no taxes on the remainder of the estate, which was substantial. So she cut a deal.
She was quite clever about it.
She cut a tax deal. But the Duc de Luynes collection of both vases and coins, it forms the core of the collection of the Bibliothèque Nationale de France, which is one of the great collections in the world today. And I've had the privilege of visiting it and having a look at some of the coins, including they have a very, very beautiful version of the Naxos Tetradrachm. So that was one aristocrat.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else?
The one that you and I have had a laugh about because we have this picture which is very amusing is the Count du Chastel. He was Belgian, not French. And he, from a very young age, decided he was going to build an amazing collection and he was going to sell it to the Belgian state. Very, very discerning collector, chose very well, upgraded his collection as he went along. So if he had one coin that was not great quality and a better one came up, he would upgrade. And so he had a very, very good collection, and he was very well connected politically with ministers in the Belgian government. And he was also well connected with one of the leading numismatists of the day, Babylon, who was the director of, I think, the Bibliothèque Nationale de France at the time. And he got him to value his collection, and then he sold it to the Belgian government, and they debated in Parliament, and they agreed to buy it, and that made it a large part of what is another of the great collections, which is in the KBR in Brussels, great collection. So he was a bit more mercenary. He had some more coins and he tried to sell them, but I think the Belgian government had decided that they'd bought enough, and so they sort of politely told him to get lost.
Yes, the picture that Tim is referring to is of Du Chastel, and he's got this amazing monocle and big handlebar moustache, and he's holding under his arm the fattest pug you'll ever see. And then there's also another one of him falling headfirst over his horse, clearly maybe hunting or something. But yeah, it's funny, you wouldn't expect him to be so mercenary, really. But yeah. So far we've looked at how numismatics begins to emerge around the Renaissance, and that traditionally it went hand in hand with collecting all things classical in the 17th and 18th centuries. After the break, stay with us for part 2, where we go from landed aristocrats like de Luynes and Du Chastel to a new, more industrial breed of collectors. See you there.
See you there.